right? So we were talking about different types of grants, and real quickly, if you get the urge, you can go to grants.gov and search specific project grants. Like you can look for any category that you want. Like, for example, let's say we want to do education, okay? And you just search it, and look, there's 531 grant opportunities for education. And one of them says improving undergraduate STEM education, education and human resources. Let's just take a quick peek, shall we? Right? It tells you that there's $63 million for this whole program, and they're going to give it to multiple institutions around the country. So any one institution, the minimum they can get is 300,000, and the max they can get is 3 million. So schools can get up to $3 million from the National Science Foundation in helping to enhance and improve STEM education. So if you have an idea at the undergraduate at college, like four-year degree programs, about how to improve STEM education, they're all about that. Okay, and they have money for you to get for up to, and it tells you right here, up to 3 years. All right, so they're willing to give you money if you can help do that, and they give you the documents, they're related, like the version history, the documents associated with it. There's no additional files, and the money that you can get, and it also will tell you eligible applicants. It's unrestricted, open to any type of the entity above, and usually, like for example, if you're going to do it at the undergraduate level, basically any college or university. All right, these things are all out there, and you can literally go back and search through these particular grants about education, and there's tons of them out there. All right, and a lot of them are for research purposes. Okay, and some of them, notice like this right here, it says U.S. aid Nigeria education crisis response. Why do we care about helping, like, for example, Nigeria and their education system? Why would we do that? By the way, we give money to a lot of different programs across the country. I mean, who cares about Nigeria, right? And the answer is pretty simple. Don't we care about people learning throughout the world? Absolutely. And part of America's mission is to help people who can't always help themselves, to give people a hand up. All right. Now let's move right along. Look, federal grants, remember, that's a way that the federal government gets the states to focus on certain policy areas by giving them money for that. It's a means of control. You can equalize resources. All right. Let's talk next, instead of federal grants, another means of control, or what we call federal mandates. Okay. Federal mandates. No, that's not when the boys get together, a mandate. Come on, that's a good joke. I hope you're laughing at home. Right? A federal mandate is when the national government makes a law requiring states to take action. That's a federal mandate. When the national government passes a law requiring states to take action. All right. Now, here's how this works. The best way to put this into effect is to give you a specific type of law. And the first one we're going to mention, the first federal mandate we'll mention, is what's called the Americans with Disabilities Act. All right. And the federal government passed this law, and here's what it required states to do. All right. There's two key provisions here. One, the first one, and nobody had any objection to this, by the way. It said that states and cities, all businesses had to they had to have fair hiring practices. They couldn't discriminate against people with disabilities, right? As long as they could otherwise do the job. So you can't discriminate in hiring. You can't discriminate against people with disabilities. So, for example, if somebody wanted to be a teacher here at Cabell Midland, and let's say they're paralyzed from the waist down and they're in a wheelchair, could we discriminate against them on that basis and not give them the job? No, all right, because that person can still be an effective teacher even though they might be in a wheelchair. Right? Question, Collins. Uh, Hold that thought. Okay. Now, mandates. Well, let me go ahead and answer that. Okay. If you're going to make any type of law about it, remember you have to have the authority to do it. Right. And we'll tell you why here in a minute, why the federal government had the authority to make this and not the one you're talking about. Okay. So the Americans with Disability Act, one of the provisions is you have to have fair hiring practices. Right. Now, they did say, look, a person still has to be qualified for the job. Would we be right to, like, if I was the captain of a firefighter unit and somebody who was in a wheelchair wanted to become a firefighter, could we deny them the job? Yes, because they can't do the job. They can't physically do the job. The same way that we can discriminate, like if it says you got to be able to carry a 160-pound dummy up 10 flights of stairs, then no matter who you are, you have to be able to do that. And if you can't physically perform that task, you can't do the job. So you're not discriminating there. You're just saying, look, ultimately, you're not physically able to do the job. Like I couldn't claim that, oh, the NFL is discriminating against me because they don't like I want to be an offensive lineman, and like actually you just can't perform the task because you're small. I'm like, gosh, it's harsh. Just a regular guy. All right. Now that provision of the law nobody objected to. All right. It's the second provision of the law that's going to make this annoying. This Americans with Disability Act required that states and cities have handicap accessible public buildings. Any public building had to be handicap accessible. Which means what did you have to do to any public or government building? Well, how would you have to modify? Give me an example of one modification. Ramps. What'd you say? Ramps. What else? The doors, the automatic doors. Right? Parking spaces. You have to have a certain number of handicap parking spaces. And by the way, some people have been doing that just because it was a good practice. But in this, they're like, hey, not only that, but what do you have to put in all buildings now? Elevators, right? And for buildings prior to 1990, especially like, for example, schools that were built prior to this, people didn't plan to build elevators in schools. I know because my high school, we literally didn't have an elevator in it because it was built in the 60s. And we had a girl that went to our school that was in a wheelchair, and literally she had an aide who had to physically pick her up and take her up and down the stairs, and they had a student who would take her wheelchair up and down the stairs for her. All right. And then her parents were like, hey, we've waited long enough. The Americans with Disabilities Act says you need to build this on here. Okay, you need an elevator on the building. And they end up building the elevator, and she was like, it was like 3 months before she graduated. The irony is not lost. Now, here's where this comes into a problem. Okay, what does it take in order to modify all these buildings? Money. Take a guess what the federal government never gave the states. They didn't give them any money for this. They're like, hey, states, here, you have to go fix all your public buildings, but we're not going to give you any funds to do it. Right? Is that kind of a jerk move? Absolutely, because states are like, look, we're already hurting for cash. And what happened was, like, you had states literally in Huntington, on sidewalks, how they put the little graded, like little ramps so that you can go up on the sidewalk now for wheelchairs. Look, that didn't even happen until like 2007, 2008. A lot of cities were out of compliance with this law, not because they wanted to be jerks towards handicapped people, but simply because they didn't have the funds to implement them. All right. But the ADA says you have to do it anyway, and you get held accountable for this. If states and cities don't do this, they're on the hook financially, because what will the government threaten to take away from them? Grant money. All right. They're like, hey, a lot of that money you get from the federal government, we'll take it away. Okay. Yes, ultimately, it was either states were on the hook for it, okay, or they had to wait till the federal government got around to giving them money. And that's what happens. That's the problem with most mandates. All right, not all of them, but most mandates go unfunded. All right, and so that's the issue. Imagine if you had a physics teacher who said, you have to build a rocket that can go at least 1,000 feet into the air. And you're like, well, all right, where's the supplies? And they're like, you have to buy them. Right? Well, that could get really pricey. And you're like, I don't have that kind of money laying around. Oof, as you kids might say. All right. One other example of a federal mandate, and then we'll review this. By the way, FYI, we're finishing this chapter up tomorrow, test on Thursday. Okay. All right. Now, one other mandate here, the No Child Left Behind Act. No Child Left Behind. Right. It required that states take certain action on education. Okay. It required that states take certain actions on education. Right? We'll get into the specifics of this tomorrow, but No Child Left Behind is where the national government told states specifically, you must do this or else. Okay? We'll pick up with that tomorrow, y'all.